Hello and welcome to Connecticut Politics TV. I am Joe Aguirre. My guest today spent 25 years in incarceration. He is, well, self described as Connecticut's favorite inmate. He's big on, amongst other things, prisoner rehabilitation. We're going to talk to Mike Liebowitz. Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I don't think I'm Connecticut's favorite inmate anymore. I'm not in there.
Well, but when you were, and
Yeah.
we're going to talk about why you were, because you had an interesting experience while you were in prison, Mike.
Okay.
You, whereas some people go into prison and get into gangs and get into bad things, you were like, oh, I need to turn my life around. And from what I was reading, you were fortunate to be with a cellmate who kind of shared that same philosophy. Could you just talk about your experience in the prison system, and then I want to get into all the problems that you cite with our prison system, and I know you also. This is what I like about you, Mike Liebowitz. You come with solutions.
Yeah. Well, when I first entered the prison system, I was 21 years old and I got into all the bad stuff: drugs, gambling, gangs, whatever. And then I decided to turn my life around. And I just started reading a lot, devouring information on psychology, philosophy, self improvement, motivation, that sort of thing. And in about 2001, I met a guy named Brent McCall who would become my best friend. And we were in the same block together from 2003 to 2007. We were in the same housing unit together. And in 2004, we both decided to turn our lives around. And we worked together. We read the same books. We would challenge one another on our character defects, help each other with our criminal thinking. And then in 2007, we became cellmates. And for other than a 90-day period, we were cellmates for the next 11 years. And we continued all the same thing: the reading, the challenging each other, criticizing each other, building, trying to become better people.
That led to you co-authoring a book, which we'll talk about in a minute. But when you talk about you get locked up, you decide after a little bit of nonsense to turn your life around. I love to read, Mike. I don't think I've read 600 books in 25 years. So great credit to you. I mean, what as you're doing that, like when you were 21 years old, where were you at maturity wise, mentally, and what did it take, maybe to be what 25 or so before you really were like, oh, what am I doing?
Well, when I was 21, I was a lunatic. I was an emotional mess. I didn't care about anybody's rights or anybody's feelings or anything else. I only cared about what I wanted when I wanted it. And ultimately, when my girlfriend at the time broke up with me, I couldn't handle it. I didn't want her with somebody else. So I arranged for three of my friends to break in their apartment in the middle of the night and beat and stab her boyfriend. She also got stabbed in the process in the leg. It was a mistake, but nonetheless, I put her at risk. That was only one of the offenses I was convicted of, but that was the main one. That got me 27 years. And then I had 6 years and then 8 with concurrent. But none of that, I mean, I could get into it, but anybody that wants to Google me can look it up. But the bottom line was I was a horrible human being. I was a monster, and it led me to prison. And after a while, I started reading, and just living that way and being that person just wasn't conducive to what I wanted to be and where I wanted to go. And then Brent McCall and I decided to turn our lives around, fortunately, at the same time.
Was there something early on that you read that felt inspiring, that maybe you felt like, you know what, I can do this?
Well, when I was 18 years old, for about a 90-day span, I actually got involved in the Amway business. And when I got involved in the Amway business, they had a teaching system which had an abundance of self improvement books. So I actually read a few of those while I was free. And then when I was in prison, when I decided to turn my life around, that reading list came back to me. So I called the guy that got me involved in the business and asked me if he would sell me the books that were on the reading list, and he agreed. And that's pretty much where I got my start in reading. So books like As a Man Thinketh by James Allen, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, and an abundance of other self-improvement type books and success type books.
Now, let me ask you this. Do you think if you didn't have the this roommate, I know like it's Club Med, if you didn't have the cellmate that you had, Mike, do you think it would have been more difficult for you to make this amazing
It,
turnaround?
well, it might have been impossible. I mean, ultimately, it's a counterfactual, so I don't know. But I do know that having somebody to challenge me, because human beings, we aren't always aware of our shortcomings or our thinking problems. So we need someone to point it out. So to have him to point that out and to be there with me all that time was great. Plus, there's the support, because when you decide to turn your life around in prison, you're going against the grain. Not only are you putting yourself at odds with the inmates, but you ultimately put yourself at odds with the staff too. And to do that alone, I can't. I don't know if I would have been able to withstand it. I don't. Because I didn't have to, but I do know that having him there to get my back through all that stuff was immensely helpful.
All right, so you're actually outside the legislative office building right now.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
testified yesterday. You came to support someone else that was testifying today. I want to play a clip of your
It was actually
testimony.
it was actually Monday I testified.
I'm sorry, Monday. Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what day it is, Mike, but that's all right. Here we go. Here's Mike's clip yesterday while he was testifying in front of the state legislature.
Here, my name is Michael Liebowitz. I spent 25 years in prison. I was released 4 months ago. I believe strongly in rehabilitation and think that inmates should be rewarded for doing so. However, there's two things about these commutations that greatly disturb me. One is they're completely arbitrary. Nobody in prison has any idea what the criteria are to get one. Secondly, I heard Mr. Cole talk about all the rehabilitative opportunities in prison, from the vet dog program, hospice, and program. These are nonsense. None of these programs have any evidence to show that they work. There's simply no way for the commutation board to know whether somebody is rehabilitated.
So basically, Mike, you're saying that these places aren't even set up for rehabilitation, let alone have programs that encourage success. And you've spoken about that. You obviously testified about that. Can you talk a little bit about sort of what the system does set you up for?
Well, first, let me ask you a question, and any of your viewers this question. If I describe to you a system where the employees were going to be protected by a union, so it's almost impossible to fire them, it takes place out of public view, so no one really knows what goes on, and the only people likely to complain are criminals who nobody really cares about, and you would know you have a recipe for disaster. It's not rocket science to figure this out, and what ends up happening is exactly what you'd think would happen. You end up with an incentive structure for both staff and inmates that's just not conducive to rehabilitation. Now, a lot of people say, well, prisons shouldn't be about rehabilitation, it should be about punishment. Okay, that's fine that you think that, but the mission statement of the Department of Corrections says something different. So if they're going to advertise to the public that part of their mission is to rehabilitate offenders and then not do it, I have a problem with that. So the inside of the prison system, what you asked, you have inconsistent rule enforcement. So what
Mhm.
you do one day might be okay, and then the next day it's not okay. A full third of the rules are rarely, if ever, enforced, and the pro and staff behaves irresponsibly on a regular basis, swearing, sleeping on the job, talking to inmates about having sex with female officers, and a number of other, what might be considered small offenses, like having their cell phones on them when that's against the rules. So that takes place on a daily basis, and that's the environment in which somehow you're supposed to get rehabilitated. And mind you, the inmates, on the other hand, spend their days gambling, yelling, screaming, slamming dominoes, which makes it very hard to read, focus, introspect, do the type of work that's necessary for rehabilitation. And noise, by the way, is against the rules. The staff just doesn't care much about it until it disturbs them.
I see. Okay. Yeah. Again, I'm with you, Mike.
Are you there?
I think when you send people to prison, I think one of the
Okay,
things.
something happened. What happened?
No, we're good. We're good. Yeah. So what is it that we have to do within these prisons? What kind of oversight needs to be done to make sure that you were not seeing the scenario you're describing?
You froze up on me.
Okay. No, I was just saying, what steps do you think need to be taken here to make prison, and not that it should be a comfortable place, but I do think the goal should be to rehab everybody
No.
we can, especially if they're
In
going to get out.
fact, it, it's too comfortable. It's too comfortable. If you don't want to reform yourself, you get to go to prison and live basically like you lived on the street, except for without women. So it is actually, I would say, too comfortable. It needs to be, ultimately, life is about incentives. And in my view, there's actually a corporation that operates out of the United Kingdom called Serco. And I'm not here to endorse them because I don't know everything about them, but I do know that part of they run private prisons in Australia, New Zealand, in the UK. And part of what they do is they reimburse staff based on results. So based on a reduction in recidivism. And I think that we could go a long way toward improving the system if staff were incentivized to actually help inmates turn their lives around rather than just be given a paycheck regardless of results. So that would be the first step. Then the programming. So right now they have plenty of programs. They're just not based on what works. And even the programming that it has a good design isn't implemented properly. So there's programs that are called evidence-based programming that are based on the risk-need responsivity model. It's probably too much to get into, but ultimately what it is it's cognitive behavioral therapy addressed to what are known as criminogenic needs. Some criminogenic needs are antisocial attitudes, values, and behaviors, antisocial peers, antisocial personality, drug abuse, lack of education. And there's a few others as well that I just can't remember, but anybody can look them up. If you look up criminogenic needs, the list will pop up. If you look up evidence-based programming, the same thing. You'll see what I'm talking about. So there's evidence as to what actually works to rehabilitate offenders. It's just not implemented.
Would you suggest, Mike, that that's because of money? That these they're for profit prisons?
I don't know. It's hard to say. If you actually had for-profit prisons, not like we have in America, there's a confusion here because we do have core civic, which are private prisons, or I would call them quasi-private. The problem is they're not paid for results. So if you go to a restaurant, the restaurant ultimately is paid for results. If a restaurant doesn't produce the result you want, a good meal and a good atmosphere, you don't return. So they get paid for results, as any private business does. But the private prisons in America, they get paid based on the amount of inmates they house. So the incentive is actually not to rehabilitate people because the less inmates you have, the less money you make. But if the prisons were reimbursed based on results, then you have an incentive structure to do it. So the cash flow would actually come based on the results they were getting.
I saw somewhere in your writing you cited about 10% of correctional facilities are equipped even to do rehabilitation.
That's
Right.
been that was an estimate. I believe I got that from a book called Correctional Rehabilitation Assessment and Prospects, or some such thing. It was written in about 2002, and they estimated at about 10%. Yeah.
Let's say it's 20 or 30% today, right? That's still a far way off from where we need to be
it's supposed to be 100.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Supposed to be, right?
Yes.
I want to talk about writing a book because that's pretty impressive. Down the rabbit hole, how the culture of corrections encourages crime, which obviously you're not for, but you're saying this system is broken and it only encourages people and the rate of recidivism to go up.
Yeah. Now, let me be clear. We use the word encourages for a reason and not cause. The people in prison are already criminals. So you're not making them criminals. However, if you're going to lock people up and you're going to let them out, then it's to the benefit of society to do something for them while they're in prison. And I think it's something like 95% of the prison population is going to be released. So you ought to do something. And they also claim that they have their global leadership in corrections. They're offering all these opportunities, which is just not accurate. It's not true. So yeah, you ought to be offering something to rehabilitate offenders if you're going to have them in your custody and you're going to tell the public that's what you're doing.
Right. it seems, and just looking at your Facebook page, that Anne
Oh,
Rand
I'm
is
sorry. I'm sorry. Let me get back to the book. Hold on. You asked about the book. I lost my train of thought. I apologize.
yeah. Let's do it.
So yeah, So the book was called How It Encourages Crime, and what we did was first we laid out exactly what the department has to deal with in terms of the criminal personality. So we had done extensive research on what criminals are, and also obviously being criminals and being around criminals, we knew. We relied on a paradigm set forward by Dr. Stanton Samenow and Samuel Yokelson in their 1970, I think, 3-volume set, The Criminal Personality. When we read that book, it was like reading a veritable blueprint for the way that we thought. So first we put that out, and then we laid out what the day-to-day life actually is like in prison in terms of the chaos, the lack of rule enforcement, the irresponsibility on part of the staff. And then we describe the programs that they have, which are not evidence-based. They're also often contrary to what is actually recommended and will work. And then we set forth what actually does work, which is what I told you is essentially cognitive behavioral therapy addressed to criminogenic needs, criminal thinking.
Explain that more. Get into that. What is it? What has to happen? What should these programs consist of to address this?
What they need to do is actually challenge and correct criminal thinking. So if a criminal, for instance, says, I'm a good person, I just did bad things, you would correct that and say, no, good people don't do bad things. I'm not saying they don't ever do bad things, but there's a difference between you running a stoplight and me knocking over liquor stores and saying, well, we both broke the rules. Well, sure, we both broke the rules, but there's a big difference, right? So it's the same thing. But most of the programs in prison actually tell prisoners, you're good people, you just made a bad choice. That's nonsense. Or they'll tell them things like, there's no such thing as right and wrong. It's a matter of opinion. Garbage. You need to identify clearly that this person has been living in an unacceptable way and teach them how to restructure their thinking. Now, in a 15, 20-minute interview, I can't go through the entire process. But cognitive behavioral therapy essentially addresses thinking errors. This is in the mainstream psychotherapy. So if you were to go see a psychologist for depression, they would retrain you to think in an effective way to eliminate your depression. They would show that your thinking is not conducive to psychological well-being, that the way you're interpreting reality is such as to lead to your depression. When it comes to criminals, we're interpreting reality in such a way as leads us to committing crime. Cognitive behavioral therapy would address that.
Okay. So that's obviously a little bit more specific, and that's kind of stuff just is not available in prison, at least in your experience. You didn't see anything like that. What?
No.
So, and I think I read too somewhere, somebody asked you about what the library was like, and you talked about, it's not like you could just go to the library whenever you want and grab a book. So, right,
No,
without these programs though, right, you're really kind of on your own to like turn your life around and make sure you're making good choices every day.
Yes, and you're not getting feedback that's telling you. So there's a lot of guys that these programs are telling them you're doing wonderful, you graduated the program with honors, here's your certificate, and then they go back to the unit and they're not getting written up for the bad things they do. So in the person's mind, they're doing well. They don't know, and there's simply no way for them to know until they get out of prison, and then the reality smacks them in the face, and then now they know all of a sudden. And I mean, I'm not going to say it's not their fault, because ultimately individuals are responsible for themselves. But again, if you're going to call an organization or a system the Department of Correction, you ought to be doing something to correct them. You cannot absolve the state from their responsibility to do what they're telling the public they're going to do.
What did you think when Kanye West and Kim Kardashian got on the prison reform train? Did you think that was helpful, or did you laugh at it?
For laughing at it, I just don't. Ultimately, they don't know what they're talking about. Most people don't know what they're talking about. When I testified in the hearing the other day, I told the courtroom the parole board don't know what they're talking about, and the senator interviewing me confessed that he didn't know, and he's on the Judiciary Committee. So when you have so many people that don't know what they're talking about, it's funny because my plan was, my friend Carlos had written a statement that he wanted read at that hearing. he couldn't be there. He's here today to testify about something else, but he couldn't be there. So he wanted me to read it. And that's what I was just going to do. But after sitting in the courtroom and listening to these people talk and just spewing BS out into the public, I couldn't take it anymore. And I had to speak. I mean, I was compelled to. And they really just have no clue.
Yeah, again, in watching that, he sort of seemed to suggest as much that he really didn't understand what was going on. And again, if it wasn't for people like you writing books and coming to testify, I don't think that we would know that. And then like you look at the recidivism rate with prisoners, and you're like, it's a waste of time. And it's like, well, if you're investing in them in the first place, you'd probably get better results.
Well, when a program is actually operated correctly, the recidivism goes down dramatically. So it's cost effective. I mean, these programs, anybody can look it up. If you go to I think it's the Washington State Institute of Public Policy, you could find it. I don't know the exact thing, but they actually do cost benefit analyses on prison programs. So you can find out which ones are effective, which ones aren't, what works, what doesn't, and actually do the research. Or you could read down the rabbit hole how the culture of corrections encourages crime and find out about this as well, and then do more research. So the information is out there for anybody actually concerned about the issue.
Might as well throw a plug in there since we're talking about the book. Where can people get your book?
Amazon.com.
Nice.
Simple as that. Go to Amazon.com.
I've been following you, not in a weird stalker way, but I saw sort of when you got out of prison, I talked to a buddy of yours who was like, "Oh, you should have Mike come on the show." And I thought, "Oh yeah." And so I've been kind of watching you, and you've done such an impressive job, Mike. I on the phone the other day. I enjoy the TikToks. I enjoy your videos. Anne Rand is somebody who has a major influence on you.
Yes.
You come out of prison and we're in the woke era. And Ayn Rand, not one for the collective, is sort of a you got to do it yourself kind of a person. Yeah. Tell me what you think of 2023 and just kind of getting back into the swing of things, knowing society's shifted quite a bit.
Well, I think it's largely a culture of unreason, in that you have what I call Trumpism, but it's really just right-wing populism centered around the personality cult of Donald Trump. And you have wokeism, which to me are basically the same thing. They're emotionalists who have an agenda, basically identity politics on both sides, and that's what they pursue. It's not based on a rational analysis of what we should have or what would work. It's just based on feelings. So I find it kind of disgusting, but I mean, I lived through that in prison, a lot of the similar stuff. The people that I hang around with aren't like that. Some people attack me, I don't want to use the word attack. They criticize me along those lines on TikTok and Facebook or Twitter, but who cares? It's whatever. They're free to say whatever they want, but I don't like that they affect public policy. That's for certain. And I don't support either party.
Right. That's greatly what it has become. It's funny. Both sides cry about cancel culture and censorship, and then they try to do it to each other. It is all nonsense. A lot of this is an illusion. And again, I just suspect that a lot of your readings and just stuff that you're posting online, Voltaire, and some of the philosophers that, you got to be a thinker, Mike. And it took you some time, and you've now dedicated your life to being a thinker and thinking on your own. And again, there's so much group thought rather on both sides. And it is ridiculous. What would you tell somebody who's in the middle, kind of looking at both sides as to like, you don't need to pick, just think for yourself, issue to issue?
I would say go to lpct.org. That's the Libertarian Party of Connecticut, of which I'm the spokesperson. So I had to plug them since you gave me a nice opportunity. But I do think that we offer an alternative. The thing is the Libertarian Party is based on principle. So it's not identity politics. It's not tribalism, which is what you largely get. And look, I speak for the party because I speak for the principles. That doesn't mean I'm going to defend every candidate that comes up as a libertarian, because I simply won't. I'm not going to put my name and my voice behind a person who I don't think is good. I will put my mind, my ideas in my speech behind principles. In the ideas of personal liberty, personal responsibility, I really believe in. I've seen them work in my own life. I've done, an excessive amount of research on the subject to think that that's what society needs. So I really would encourage people to check us out. lpct.org.
lpct.org. I've always been fascinated by the Libertarian Party. Again, that notion of liberty, that notion of just the government doesn't need to be in your business. The government's not going to protect you from all that ails you. How do we sort of get beyond that thought that I think a lot of people are suffering? And again, on both sides, that again, where the right doesn't want to say the government has the solutions, that's where they're looking to get their solutions from, just the same as the left.
Yeah. Yes. The idea that Republicans are for small government and are for the Constitution is to plagiarize Jeremy Bentham. It's nonsense on stilts. They just aren't. And that's the thing. And that's why I try to differentiate myself from them, because nobody is going to confuse me, or normally going to confuse me, with a liberal Democrat. But when I talk capitalism, small government, people think that's Republicans, and it's simply not. And look, I'll debate any Republican out there on these issues, or Democrat too, for that matter. But for a Republican who thinks he's small government, let's get together. Let's have a discussion. We'll find a forum, and we can do it. But that's why the Libertarian Party, you said, how do you get to people? Well, you have to explain it to them. You have to explain it to them that having a minimum wage, first of all, it violates the rights of two adults to enter into contracts. Secondly, it harms the very people you're trying to help, because ultimately it leads to unemployment amongst low-skilled workers. Now, I mean, there's sophisticated arguments for the things I just said. I wouldn't expect anybody to take my word for it. But if you pay attention, you look into these issues, you learn about them, and you move on. That's why, for instance, I have my podcast now. I go on Todd Feinberg because I'm trying to spread these ideas. I'm trying to make a rational argument for why we need a free society.
Yeah. Listen, Mike, I'm always going to be glad to give you a platform. I love what you're doing. I find it extremely admirable. Should also mention, while in prison, 2 associate's degrees, completed 2 certificate programs as well.
Yes.
Again, this guy's a good follow on social media. Make sure you look him up.
Thank you.
And again, that book, which you can get on Amazon, Down the Rabbit Hole, How the Culture of Corrections Encourages Crime.
Can I do one more plug here? Can I plug one more
Plug away,
thing?
my man. Do it.
My podcast, The Rational Egoist. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. The Rational Egoist. We're talking to some of the brightest minds in the liberty movement. Check it out.
Yeah. By the way, good podcast. Yeah, man, Mike, I wish you nothing but success going forward. We'll definitely have you back so we can continue to kind of get into some of these conversations. It really is important, I think every single right that we have in this country is precious, because, and you yourself can speak to this, it can be taken away at any time.
Yes.
And we fight a lot back and forth about rights. And I'm the kind of person, Mike, that, to me, I don't want to see the gun rights go away. I don't want to see the abortion rights go away. I don't want to see any rights going away ever. I don't think, and again, we're so kind of closed-minded that we don't think about the long-term ramifications or the consequences long-term. And I think that's something that you're big on. Just the idea that you live with consequences, that's again, as we move forward as a country, I think we need rational, intelligent people with good ideas and thoughts. So thank you.
Yeah, no doubt. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. Come back anytime.
You are so funny. Mike Liebowitz, big thank you. Down the Rabbit Hole, How the Culture of Corrections Encourages Crime is the name of the book. And also make sure you check out the podcast. You have a website too, Mike, or no?
I do, but it's malfunctioning. So just, you can check me out I'm on Instagram, The Rational Egoist. I'm on TikTok, The Rational Egoist. You can get me on Facebook, even on Twitter, but I'm not as much as I am on Facebook.
Right on. All right, Mike Liebowitz, appreciate your time, my friend. Have a great day. So that's going to do it for this episode of Connecticut Politics TV. Make sure you tune in tomorrow night at 5 o'clock for all the latest interviews and analysis from top leaders across the state. Make sure you also visit ctpolitics.tv for all the latest. I'm Joe McGuire. Catch you next time on Connecticut Politics TV.